The IRS has made progress in customer service, especially for people calling its Taxpayer Assistance Centers. But the so-called TACs still have issues, such as difficulty in dealing with calls for changing appointments. In fact, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration has a few recommendations for the IRS in that regard. Details now from the Director of TIGTA's Management and Exempt Organization Audits, Aley. He spoke with Tom Temin.
These are called Taxpayer Assistance Centers, and this is where you go in and get face-to-face service with the IRS. Before taxpayers get to the actual appointment, first step is to call in and call for an appointment. And there's a special line that's a TAC appointment line. And they have made improvements compared to 2022 with respect to hanging up, not getting service to some of these callers. And they've also reduced the wait time to actually talk to a customer service rep. And they reduced the amount of time that it took to get an appointment. Now, once they got into the tax, they also increased the number of appointments they actually conducted compared to 2022, and they also increased the number of employees that are working in the tax. So they've made some improvements there.
And just to be clear, the phoning in is for purposes of setting up what will be an in-person appointment.
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, the reason that the IRS does that is, in a lot of cases, the IRS is able to resolve the taxpayer's issue over the phone without the need for them to actually go in and visit a TAC. So that's why they do it that way. In fact, in 2023, a little over 30% of all callers to the tax, they were able to resolve their issue without the need to schedule an appointment.
Right. So that really eases the burden then on the tax if you can prevent people from coming in and resolve their issue.
That's correct. Both the taxpayer and the IRS has a reduced burden if the issue can be resolved over the telephone.
But you also found that in changing or altering or canceling, confirming appointments, there were some issues.
There were. So when taxpayers were calling the appointment lines, we found that the IRS can make some improvements to reduce the number of times the calls are actually transferred. And we made some recommendations along those lines. Now, once in the tax, you're right. They had the special Saturday hours. I think there were 4 of them. They were from February through May of 2023. They did them once a month at 93 different tax offered them at one time or another. Some offered them more than one weekend. We posed as taxpayers and visited 16 of those locations to assess the quality of operations. We asked one of 2 general tax law questions and assessed the accuracy of the responses given. We also looked at things like orderliness, wait times, employee professionalism at these locations. And overall, the service that was provided was accurate and professional. And the assistance that we received aligned with the tax law questions that we asked. Now, we did experience some very long wait times at some of the locations, 3 to 7 hours. Sometimes that was in poor weather conditions outside. And our analysis also showed that the demand for the Saturday service exceeded that of the weekday service at those same locations for those same weeks.
Just as an aside, it seems like the IRS should have them open evenings and weekends even more than during the week, in some sense.
So this year, what they did is they expanded the hours during filing season for Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were open early in the morning and later in the afternoon at select locations. So they are moving in the right direction to try to offer more hours, and they did do the Saturday hours again at select locations during the same February to May.
Because if the average person calling to these centers to get an appointment, either to get the resolution on the phone or to come in and have their taxpayer problem solved, these are not corporate individuals that have legal staffs and compliance staffs and accounting staffs that can maybe work 9 to 5 on tax issues. Most of these are individual taxpayers, fair to say?
That's fair to say. A lot of the services, again, can be handled over the phone. The ones that can't, a lot of them involve identity theft verification, things like that. Cash payments now they didn't do that on the Saturdays, but the services that are provided at the TAC are unique in that regard, and a lot of them are just individual taxpayers that are trying to get identity theft issues resolved.
We are speaking with Aley. He's Director of Customer Service and Exempt Organization Audits at the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. And just briefly, you mentioned transferring calls. Why does that have to happen? And that seemed to be trouble.
So they have a software system that allows them to schedule appointments when you call in on the line. And any of the customer service representatives who are working those TAC appointment lines can schedule the appointment. but it requires special licenses for the software in order to modify, either change it or cancel those appointments. And what happens is if a caller calls into the TAC appointment line and needs to make a change to an existing appointment, sometimes the person that they're talking to doesn't have that license. So they have to transfer them to another employee who does have that license on a different TAC line. TAC has more than one line.
Right. So how can they fix that? Do they have more licenses than they're assigning, or can they be assigned dynamically?
So that's a good question. So they have, I believe it's 2,500 licenses throughout the service. Most of them are assigned to the employees who work in the TACs because they handle all aspects of the appointment. About 500 of them, I believe it is 500 of them, are assigned to the customer service reps who work the phone lines. But the IRS had only allocated about 200 of those 500. So there was 300 that were not assigned to any employees. So we recommended they assign those to try to increase the number of employees who could assist taxpayers with those sort of things. And also, the IRS is going to put in a menu, a telephone menu before. So when a caller calls in, it'll ask, "Are you trying to cancel or reschedule an appointment?" And it'll direct you directly to one of the agents who can help you with that instead of going to somebody who can't.
Yeah, and these licenses are a grand total of $56 a year. It seems like they could really go to town and have 5,000 licenses, and they'd never have that problem.
They are not inexpensive. I don't know that they would have been trained. So the way that it works with, and you're right, there are thousands of customer service representatives, any of whom could be assigned. They have to be trained to work the taxpayer assistance appointment line, but not everybody works that line.
Right, so they can have fewer licenses than employees, but still have enough licenses, in other words.
Yes.
All right, and you had some general recommendations here. Let's review those quickly.
So the IRS actually has agreed to take some corrective actions for all of these. We had 5 recommendations. I mentioned a couple of them: allocating the software, setting up a menu that allows callers to go directly to somebody that can assist them, and then in the tax themselves, just some of our observations during our visits for improvements in the execution of the assistance. Specifically, some triage procedures so that they can move people through the line a little bit faster, additional training, and then some quality assurance corrective actions to assist. Well, it's sharing information with other groups within the IRS. They generally take corrective action based on quality reviews. What they could do a little bit better job of is sharing those results across the IRS so others can benefit from those corrective actions.
And earlier you mentioned that the wait time sometimes stretched out to 3 to 7 hours. That's like going to a bad doctor almost, where that happens pretty regularly. That must have been something. I mean, are appointments on a schedule, or just that day you can come in?
Okay. So on the Saturday, no schedule. There were no scheduled appointments on the Saturday. So that 3 to 7 hour wait, those long wait times, those were on the Saturdays. No appointments. It was long lines out the door in some cases. As I said, people waiting outside. When you schedule an appointment, typically you wouldn't have that. You would walk in at your scheduled time and meet with the IRS employee at the TAC. So the Saturdays were unique in that.
Sure.
Yeah, no appointments. Yeah.
It sounds like there's some really major programmatic insight in that phenomenon, I would say.
There's a couple things probably driving that. I mean, Saturday hours, people are working during the week, so you have more folks that would be available potentially that aren't, wouldn't otherwise be able to go in. And then, as I said, no appointments were necessary, so you didn't have to schedule something in advance. It could take you, I believe in FY 2023, it was about 14 days to get an appointment if you called the TAC. Whereas obviously if you walk in, you're hoping you see somebody that day.
Sure. And just a final question with respect to when someone does phone in, is the agent receiving the call able to access information about that taxpayer, or is they just answer general questions based on tax law?
Yes, they can access the taxpayer's account. And they use what's called an interactive tax law assistant, which allows them to kind of walk through based on how the taxpayer responds to the questions that the CSR would ask them, the customer service rep would ask them.
But in general, the IRS, you said, agreed with your recommendations this time around.
Yes, they agreed with all 5 recommendations.
Carl Aley is Director of Management and Exempt Organization Audits at the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. We'll post this interview along with a link to his report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. And you can subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.